What's poppin', y'all? Welcome back to another episode of NBA Weekly. I'm your host, Pee Wee the Plug. In today's episode, we have to react to the Brooklyn Nets Media Day. So a lot of you know today is the NBA Media Day. Every team is getting covered. A lot of quotes, a lot of headlines around the league. But I wanted to start my Media Day tour with the Brooklyn Nets. Since they got swept by the Boston Celtics in the first round, the Nets have kind of dominated the headlines with Kyrie Irving in his contract situation, plus the vaccine mandate, Kevin Durant shortly requesting a trade after that, and then Ben Simmons in his back situation, his mental health, and his overall availability. The Nets have been extremely interesting. So I started my Media Day tour with them. And, of course, starting with them, you have to start with Kevin Durant. And right off the bat, I would say that Kevin Durant really set the tone, in my opinion, for the Brooklyn Nets Media Day. I love his presence. I love his approach and the insight that he offered up when he was hit with the hard-hitting questions. Usually when we see Kevin Durant, there's times where he's a bit closed off or a little agitated or annoyed with the media, rightfully so with some of the questions they ask. I won't lie. I admit to that. But in this particular situation, he seemed prepared and mature with his presence and his tone when answering the questions that he probably kind of saw coming. Everybody had a question surrounding why he asked for a trade or why did he come back after requesting a trade. And his first answer about the trade request and everything offered a lot of insight. And he basically put out and said, you know, when I committed to this team with a contract extension, I envisioned the team being me, Kyrie Irving, and James Harden. So you fast forward right there. The guy signed an extension thinking that it was going to be a team of him, Harden, and Kyrie with Steve Nash, two-time MVP, now being a player's coach, leading the charge for them. And he probably had in his mind that they were going to be dominating the league. Now you fast forward to the offseason, just got swept by Boston. There was no James Harden. We had Ben Simmons got acquired for him. Ben Simmons didn't play a single game, and his back is now the reason why he's not playing. It went from mental health and him recovering from that to now he's ready to play, and then his back gives out on him. So now that's a whole new set of situations. Our coach didn't really look the best, not going to lie. When it came down the stretch of the season and him coaching into the playoffs, just didn't have an answer for anything, really. And then Kyrie Irving, the one thing that you did have there for when he even joined the Brooklyn Nets to begin with, only played 20-something games, and it was because of something that they really couldn't predict coming in a million years. So I kind of understood why and how he felt the way he felt. Another consistent theme throughout his interview with his answers was accountability. He kept using that word accountability, how they lacked accountability in the Nets organization from up top to the team. And, you know, there were stretches throughout the season when he was hurt and he would see the team lose games and he kind of would look around and feel like, even though I'm not there and I know who I am and how valuable I am when I'm on the court, we still shouldn't be losing like that. And when we are losing, why is there a lack of accountability? Why do we have no fight? He mentioned the Mavericks and how they looked after they didn't have Luka. He mentioned the Warriors and how they looked when Steph went down and how the Nets just didn't have that same type of feel and fight to them when they were put in certain situations. And I can attest to that. He even said that Steve Nash and Sean Marks, when he brought those things up, they didn't argue with it. They felt the same exact way. And from that perspective, that made me understand why he had doubts about going forward with this team. And now you also put in a situation where Kyrie Irving is like, what are we doing here? They can't really figure out a middle ground for a contract. And then that even brought up a point with Kevin Durant saying, I am not a liaison for Kyrie Irving in the Brooklyn Nets organization. Their situation is something they're always going to have to handle. And I felt like that was a very important and underrated thing that Kevin Durant brought up in this entire situation, was the fact that never in his career has he ever been the guy who walks into an office and demands certain things. I demand that you pay him. I demand that you run this play for me. I demand this. I demand that. Throughout the course of the offseason for the Brooklyn Nets, a lot of things for them always circle back to Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. So I felt like him being in this situation at Media Day where all the cameras were on him, everybody had a question about his trade request and everything, that was the perfect time for him to come out and say, I am not a liaison for Kyrie Irving and Kevin and the Nets. Don't look at me for anything that doesn't involve Kevin Durant. And that was why I said I think he set the tone for this Media Day for the Brooklyn Nets. And I understood a lot of what he was saying, and that was the consistent thing: the lack of accountability, the lack of fight, how they really had no respect on the court when they were playing, and how he had been on championship teams and teams that were close to winning championships, and that was something that every one of those teams had. When Kevin Durant brought up a lot of these things, I found myself not being able to disagree with him. You know what I mean? These were fine points that he brought up, and I feel like a lot of people don't really think with that type of perspective because the media were not players. We're not Kevin Durant. So when all we see is a trade request and we react, but to hear him actually bring up these points, I found myself saying, man, yeah, a lot of these things were missing for the Brooklyn Nets, and that's why they looked as pathetic as they looked in the first round against the Boston Celtics. And I think that kind of sets a tone because it gives everybody that understanding that they have to come in with a chip on their shoulder, and there's a sense of urgency. Kyrie Irving has had his situations where he's needed to be held accountable. Ben Simmons has needed to be held accountable. Kevin Durant himself is going to be needed to held accountable. Steve Nash and Sean Marks, they're going to be needed to held accountable. So if they come in with that mindset, all in agreement and the same page with that, I think everything goes up for the Brooklyn Nets, and that's one of the reasons why I love the way that Kevin Durant conducted himself and how he answered the questions during his interview. Now, as far as Kyrie Irving's interview, obviously a lot of people brought up the contract situation and the vaccine and whatnot, and Kyrie Irving kind of talked about feeling like the Nets put him in an ultimatum type situation where if he got the vaccine, they were going to extend him, and if he didn't, it was going to be hard for them to extend him. And that point I kind of understand, right, from both sides. I can understand why the Nets don't want to commit 4 years, $100+ millions to Kyrie Irving without seeing him be fully committed. With everything that's going on in the world right now, how bad would it be for them to commit all of that money? He's not even playing. He's a very big part of them having championship aspirations. So with that hesitancy, I can kind of understand. And for Kyrie, whenever you're employed by somebody or you have a team or you're a part of something, you want that comfort of knowing that they're behind you in every step of the way. And for him, I can understand why he would want that support and why he would want to be backed by the higher ups when feeling like he's standing on something that's extremely important to him. So that for me was kind of 50-50. I felt both sides, and I can understand why it was hard for them to meet in a common ground situation for them to get a contract done to move on in the summer. Another thing Kyrie brought up was the awkwardness of Kevin Durant requesting a trade after he had opted in. And I didn't really know how to handle this because they are best friends. And he did say he honored Kevin Durant's trade request, obviously, but he did admit that there was some awkwardness there. But for him to come out and say that, let us all know that he had no idea that the trade request was coming. And for them to be two guys who we've seen kind of join the Brooklyn Nets together and be in this together, for him to not know that was going on or was going to happen was kind of odd. And for him to stress that it was after he had opted in was also another thing that was odd. And that kind of made me feel like, what's going on with Kai and Kevin Durant's relationship? I'm not trying to steer anything up because I do understand that they're best friends. But that was real weird. As an outsider looking in, that was really, really weird or interesting to know that there wasn't any communication between the sides when all of this was going on, because in my mind as an outsider, I guess that Kyrie Irving probably knew a trade request was coming. I kind of felt like Kevin Durant had some knowledge of what Kyrie Irving's contract situation was with the Brooklyn Nets. So for Kyrie Irving to sit there and say that was kind of shocking to me, if I'm just being honest. I don't know what to take of it just yet, but it was a little bit interesting. Even with the ultimatum thing, that made me feel like what's for them to go forward. I know Kyrie Irving is going to have an extremely big chip on his shoulder, but the next offseason there isn't going to be a player option. He's going to be an outright free agent, and is that going to leave a bad taste in his mouth? Are those two things going to kind of leave him feeling like, hey, I'm going to come in, I'm going to have the best year I can have, but if we don't win a championship, I'm out? Me and Kevin Durant's relationship is shaky. Not saying he said that, but for them to not have a sense of conversation between that is kind of weird. The Nets really giving me an ultimatum, not supporting me in my decision, also kind of shaky. That's something that I'm keeping my eye on. I'm not trying to steer anything up or put words in anybody's mouth, but I'm definitely watching that situation closely as the season goes through. Aside from all of those things, though, Kyrie Irving did have, like Kevin Durant, some great answers when they talked about the team, even specifically Ben Simmons. Kyrie talked about being somebody that could have his back, being there for him, understanding that he is a big boy and can handle himself, but just wanted to be there to support him, knowing everything that he went through, and love to see that, he wanted everything that's in store. Ben Simmons wants the greatness that is out there for him, and that he's going to honor that and also be somebody that can help guide him throughout the ups and downs that occur during a season, and talking about having that connection with every one of his teammates and knowing that they have to be like that in order to win and have that goal. And that's kind of on par with some of the same things Kevin Durant was saying, the accountability, the partnership, and the unity to be able to be good teammates to one another and be the best teammate that they could be for everybody there, and the importance of that when you're trying to build something that's a winning culture. One of the major things that stood out, and that I was happy to hear Kyrie address, was the situation of, the stigma being put on him that he didn't want to play basketball and that he was willing to give up something that he loved so much, over, being the voice of the voiceless, and how that just wasn't accurate, and how it kind of just fell in his lap. He was standing on something that meant a lot to him that also happened to mean a lot to a lot of people. So he ended up indirectly being a voice for them. But for people to question him wanting to play, or if he wanted to play, or he just was willing to give it up, he kind of didn't appreciate. And he saw that during the offseason, when the options were out there. He did have options, but they were limited because a lot of people weren't sure about him wanting to play, and he just didn't like that or appreciate that. And I felt that was important for Kyrie to come out and address, because Kyrie is a guy who, to me, for the most part, seems to love the game. You don't have the basketball ability that Kyrie Irving has without having a pure, authentic love for the game. I think there's certain things that occurred that meant more to him than a lot of other people, and he was forced to stand on that, and like he said, basically forfeit a 4-year, $100 million contract because he didn't want to get vaccinated. And it just so happened to be something that a lot of people in the world were going through, and he ended up being a voice for them. And it was just a situation that was a lot bigger than him. But at the end of the day, it didn't really represent him not wanting to play the game of basketball. But the last thing that stood out to me the most, and another thing that makes me feel good for the Nets, if I am a Nets fan or if I'm someone in an organization, was him speaking on the embarrassment he felt for the first time in his career after being swept by the Boston Celtics. And not that it had anything to do with them being the Boston Celtics, but the fact that they got swept and it was embarrassing. And again, it's a common theme from all of these interviews and from this entire media day that there's going to be a chip on the shoulder of everybody in the Brooklyn Nets organization. There's going to be something to prove, or just this chip to answer some doubters from everybody in that entire organization. And then that leads me to Ben Simmons, who, it was good to hear him say, he was ready to start the season. He's ready to play. He was able to talk about the Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant situations, and his answer were kind of consistent throughout that, basically saying that he can only control what he can control. And at that time, his control was to get his health under control so he could be available for this season. They also asked him about playing point guard and what position he would play, and has he had those conversations with his teammates or coaches. And he basically answered by saying, hey, I haven't, but I'm out here willing to do whatever it takes for us to win. And a lot of the things he said went back to him playing in Philadelphia, back when they didn't have, Joel for certain stretches. There was a team with him, Bellinelli, Ersan Ilyasova, J.J. Redick, where it was a lot more open. It was a lot more perimeter centric, and it was a lot more ball movement. And I think they won 14 or 15 games straight during that span, and how he kind of looked at the similarities between that team and this team, and how that could look with him playing small ball 5. And he thinks this team can get up and down a lot more because they don't play from the post like they did in Philadelphia with Joel, because Joel is so dominant, you kind of have to force feed him the ball. But because they don't have that type of player on this team, they can have a lot more ball movement and fluidity on the offensive side of the basketball. So it was good to see him already picturing certain things for them and them having an identity, because it sounds like they've been practicing or playing, and there was an early glimpse of what that would look like. So that also kind of made me feel like the Brooklyn Nets could have something there as far as the offensive unity. Also going in with the Ben Simmons interview with Seth Curry. Seth Curry talked about having a head start of already playing with Ben in Philadelphia, and how, he at this point has gotten a little bit underrated with how, he brings so much to the table as a playmaker with his size and his versatility defensively. And Even it was interesting to hear Seth Curry talk about when they played in Philadelphia. He kind of, talked to Doc and really pushed him to play Ben more at the small ball five because of how fun it was and how much more opportunities came from that. So seeing Ben Simmons potentially play that stretches of small ball five with them with Seth, Royce O'Neal, or Joe Harris, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving is something that seems like a lot of the players are going to like and going to push for because it's going to allow them to get up and down. And to hear him say that was interesting for them to have Joel Embiid, but him to push Doc to really play Ben at the small ball five, and even say, Ben Simmons at this point is underrated. I think is another good thing for Ben Simmons to be able to hear, because at this point, I do think Ben Simmons is underrated. A lot of people giving him shit about things that happened so long ago, and all people talk about is what he can't do instead of what he can do. And when you talk about the pieces they have on this team on paper, it can be something that's going to be dangerous. And then to really wrap up the media day for the Nets, you got Sean Marks and Steve Nash. There were some things for me that were interesting in their part of the interview. First and foremost, they were up there together, which I saw some Net fans didn't appreciate for Steve Nash because they kind of felt like he was allowing Sean Marks to just answer some questions for him. But I love the approach Sean Marks had when he was asked about Kevin Durant wanting Steve Nash and Sean Marks himself fired or replaced, I guess. And he didn't deny the report at all, but instead said that instead of taking it personal, it allowed them to kind of look at themselves in the mirror and see what they can do differently to not make him feel that way. What could they be doing different, or what could they change to make the situation different? And I think that's the proper perspective for everybody in the Nets organization to have right now. What could we be doing different to make these situations different? And I think that's why Kevin Durant set the tone with the accountability, because that's what accountability is from the top to bottom, is looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, what can I be doing different to contribute to winning habits and success in this organization? Steve Nash also talked about him and Kevin Durant's relationship and how far back it goes, and how, families have these type of situations, and this isn't a new NBA topic or anything. This happens in the league all the time. And then ultimately, Sean Marks was just like, yo, if Kevin Durant wanted out and still wanted out, he wouldn't be here. And, that was just a great answer, in my opinion, to wrap everything up. It's just like, yo, Kevin Durant is here. We have him here. We're moving on, and we're all on the same page now. I will say that the middle ground stuff with Kyrie Irving is something that I'm definitely curious to see how it handles. Like I talked about earlier, Sean Marks went on to say that they just couldn't find a middle ground, or a common ground rather. And I think that's something that's very interesting in this whole thing, because depending on how the Nets start this season and how the beginning of it goes, there's a lot of different ways for this season to turn out. There's obviously the first part where the Nets are just clicking on all cylinders. Everything that they're saying in these interviews, they match with their actions, and they just start off the year and they're the team that we think that they could be. There's also a world where a lot of these answers are bullshit and people don't feel the way that they're saying, and the actions don't meet the words, and there's more turmoil, or there's more in-house problems flaring up throughout the season, and Kyrie Irving is a name that comes up in trade situations again, without a contract extension and without the performance that they're expecting, or maybe on-court chemistry isn't what they projected. His name is undoubtedly going to come up in reports if they don't come out fast and quick in a hurry to dominate the league. It's definitely going to be in the air, and I think that's something that could potentially hinder them, having that cloud around. That's why you always hear a lot of players when the season starts, like Giannis' situation, we comes in and say, yo, I'm not talking about none of that until it presents itself. I'm trying to win games with my team. But knowing the Nets and how they've handled things, and Kyrie Irving and the reports and everything, that the rumors that always comes with this team, that could be something that could hinder them if they don't get out to the start that I think they're capable of. But for me, I took this as a good media day for the Nets. I'm optimistic for them. I think that they can have a very good year. A lot of the players and a lot of the important pieces have points to prove, and they should have chips on their shoulder. There's no reason Kevin Durant doesn't have a chip on his shoulder right now and feels like he has a point to prove to be the leader of a team that can go all the way. There's no reason why Kyrie Irving shouldn't have a chip on his shoulder. I feel like he needs to prove to the league right now that I am committed to play basketball, that I can be focused, and that I can be, a featured, valuable piece on a winning team. There's no reason why Ben Simmons shouldn't have a chip on his shoulder and feel like he has the point to prove to everybody who questioned him and his mental health last year and everything that went on. Same thing with Steve Nash and Sean Marks. There's no reason they shouldn't have a chip on their shoulders or a point to prove that Steve Nash can coach this team and be a good coach with all of this talent, that Sean Marks can get this team over the hump to get them to a championship. There's a lot of chips that should be on these shoulders and a lot of points to prove. And I think if it comes together in the right way and a lot of the actions match the words, the Brooklyn Nets can be the team that a lot of us think they have potential to be. I feel happy for the Brooklyn Nets. I feel good for them. There are a couple situations that I'm kind of like, I'm going to be watching very close. But overall, leaving the media day tour with them, I feel like they can be scary if everything comes together. I'm Pee Wee the Plug. This is NBA Weekly. I appreciate everybody that tuned in. Like I said, this is the media day. A lot of teams and a lot of things to talk about and cover. We'll get to that in the coming days. I had to start with the Brooklyn Nets. If you did watch Media Day or if you hear everything that I said, I want to know your reactions to Kevin Durant's quotes, Kyrie Irving's quotes, Sean Marks and Steve Nash quotes, and also Ben Simmons. And what are your expectations for this Brooklyn Nets team in this upcoming season? As always, I love you guys, and I'll see you soon. I'm out. Peace.